Hey everybody, good evening. It's Ellen Lewis from Crazy for You. And tonight I just thought it would be fun to talk about notions. Notions are those little things that we just don't think about at all. They are inexpensive. We probably have jillions of them, but they come in so handy. And when you don't have what you need, it's so incredibly frustrating. So I thought it would be fun just to kind of dump out my notions bag that I always have with me. I call it my little bag of tricks, to show you kind of what I have in there and maybe how I use some of those things. There might even be a little bit on fixing mistakes in there and catching them and all of that. So I thought it would be fun tonight. If you have a favorite notion that you keep in your knitting bag that's really special and useful for you, please tell me in the chat. I would love to know about it. I hope everybody is doing well. Some wonderful person informed me yesterday that it is 13 days until Christmas. And that was some information that I just didn't need to have today. so, um, anyway, let us get started. So, you do know what I'm talking about, a notions bag. Everybody has one. If you've seen me, you know that this is mine. I've had it for a million years. And I was just going through and looking at some of the things that I had put in the newsletter this week and looking for my version of it. And I realized I have loaned out my clear ruler and needle gauge. Oh my goodness, I don't know where that got to. There's always somebody borrowing that one. And also my stitch fixer. But that's okay because we have lots and lots of ways to get around that. Hey, Terry. Hey, Jal. Nice to see everybody. Okay. So, first off, I keep a needle gauge. This is a ruler and a needle gauge together. You can see this is my old one. I have a much nicer one in the shop, and I really like it because the new one is clear and it's an 8-inch ruler. And I love that. And except for today, I always have it with me because it gives me 8 full inches, plus it's marked in the middle with a 4-inch bump. So you can see how many stitches you have if you're trying to count your stitches or your rows. And I like that it's clear. So when it's clear, I can lay it on top of my fabric and see my stitches right through it. I know you can count at the top, but something is very comforting about being able to see those stitches and the fabric right through your gauge. So I love that. And I think that is super useful. So I have that typically with me all the time. And I like that it has the needle gauge in it. So these little holes, those are where you would put in your needle tips or your needles, because I'll tell you, I can't see the little writing on there. And if they're wooden needles, or even if they're not, sometimes the size will get rubbed off the more you use them, or they're just too small for me to see without my glasses. So this is super handy to be able to put your needle through and then know exactly what size it is that you are using or looking for, because it's hard to tell. It's really hard to tell between a 5 and a 4 or a 3 and a 4, I think. Can't just do it by looking. You absolutely have to check. All right, let's see. Holly, I love my needle threader for threading yarn onto different sizes of needles and for weaving in. I adore my Cocoknits Notions. Yes, I love Cocoknits Notions too. She seems to really kind of get it in terms of the kinds of things that knitters like to have handy. I'm going to talk about her claw clips later on too. And tell me, Holly, do you have one of her stitch fixers? I think those are really great. So this is one thing that I like to keep handy all the time. And another thing, obviously, I like to have a little teeny tiny pair of scissors, very sharp scissors. I have these in my little pouch. And then I have another set that are little stork scissors that I keep in my sunroom. And I have them actually on a piece of braid. And at one end is the stork scissors and the other end is a little strawberry. Do you remember those little strawberries from when you were a kid? And, you would put needles in those and the pins would go in the little tomato thing. You guys remember that? Tell me you remember that. Anyway, I think it's filled with sawdust and it was supposed to keep your needles nice and sharp. So anyway, nice sharp scissors. And I like these because they have a very sharp point, which means you can get right down in there and cut your strands if you need to. And once you have a nice pair of scissors, you know that you never want to use them to cut anything except fabric or yarn, which is fabric to be, right? You don't want to use it on paper or plastic or anything like that. I don't know how it works, but it really, really dulls them. So you keep them special away from anybody who might be looking to open up a bag of Cheetos with them. Yes. Okay. So Holly says she does have a stitch fixer. Okay. What else did I want to show you? Okay. I always have, I actually have 3 right now, but these are my favorite darning needles. I love these needles because they have a really big eye for all kinds of yarn. And I love this little tip. It's a bent tip, and that helps when I am seaming things because as you're seaming, going in and having that little tip just sort of pop up underneath the stitches or in between those bars when you're making your seams is just so helpful. And it's blunt, so it's less likely to split your stitches. So I love these obviously for seaming. I also use them for putting in a lifeline. So another thing that I'm always going to have in my notions bag, and it's not really a notion, but it's just some lace weight yarn. This is really smooth, fine lace weight yarn. And this is what I use for a lifeline. And I use it, I put my, put this yarn through the eye on this little darning needle. And this is what I use to thread the lifeline through the stitches that are on the needle when I want to insert a lifeline. So these 2 together are pretty important when it comes to stuff in your knitting bag. Okay. I feel like I'm talking so fast. I'm sorry. It's been a crazy day. I don't know why. It shouldn't have been. I guess my son had a doctor's appointment all the way up in Huntingtown, which is an hour away. You just don't realize how an hour up and an hour back takes a huge bite out of your day. So the other thing that obviously you are going to have in your knitting bag, just like I am, are probably 100,000 stitch markers because there's a million uses for stitch markers. I use them to mark where my pattern changes. Like if I'm working an accessory and it has a 5-stitch border, I'm going to put a stitch marker to indicate, hey, something different is happening here. It's also nice to put a stitch marker if you know you have a certain number of decreases to do. If you know you have 8 decreases to do, counting in after your selvage stitch, counting in 8 and putting your stitch marker, then you know how many more decreases you have to do. You kind of know where you are on that path. Did anybody see the short that I did with Keisha? Keisha was in the shop and she had a stitch marker, a removable stitch marker like this one. This is a Cocoknits stitch marker, and that's removable. And she had this on her fabric. And normally when you put one of these stitch markers on your fabric, it's to mark the right side or to mark a particular stitch when you're going to do a double decrease. What she did, and I thought this was so clever, so I put it out on Instagram and on as a YouTube short. She knew that she had 8 decreases to do. So what she did is she took this removable stitch marker and she put 8 removable stitch markers on it. And then she attached it to her fabric. And every time she made one of her decreases, she took that removable stitch marker off and put it over on the side right where she had made the decrease. Now, obviously, you can read your knitting and you can see your decreases, but there's something very comforting about having that decrease marked. It's like, I don't know, when my husband leaves the house, he locks the door and then he gives it a 1, 2, 1, 2 just to make sure it's locked. Not so much because he doesn't think it's locked, but he wants to remind himself, yes, I locked the door. So he doesn't drive down the road and think, gosh, did I lock the door? It's the same kind of thing. When you take that stitch marker and you mark the place that you did your decrease, then you know that you didn't forget. right? And you do that on both sides, and it's really kind of helpful if you want to. But she was doing it on one side because I think she had a, I can't remember. But anyway, she does do that on the one side, and I think that was just brilliant. So very fun. A lot of people saw that. That was cool. Let's see. Ah, thank you. I'm glad, Holly. She likes the decrease idea. So I love that. Again, those removable stitch markers are great for marking the right side of your fabric. It doesn't seem like you would need to do that, but if you're working in a reversible pattern, whether that's garter stitch or seed stitch or moss stitch or something with a traveling knit purl stitch pattern that looks the same on both sides, it's very, very helpful to know which, at a glance, which is your right side and which is your wrong side, so that you don't have to constantly look down at your cast on. You just sort of know, and that stitch marker helps you to know. And that is when you would use one of these removable stitch markers, which I absolutely do love. The other time you want to have these handy is if you've dropped a stitch or you need to mark a place where you have an error in your fabric. So if I have a problem on my fabric like this, and I know that this stitch has dropped down, I'm going to put a locking stitch marker there, removable stitch marker, so that it doesn't get any worse. Okay. So it doesn't drop down anymore. Now, obviously, this is big wool and it's a little on the sticky side, so it's not going to go anywhere. But if you're working in a fine fabric or you're a very tight knitter, that stitch is going to get away from you fast. So marking it when it comes off your needle or when there's a problem is always helpful. Also, if you're picking up stitches and you know after you've picked up a whole bunch that you probably needed to pick up one more over here on this side, you can go ahead and put that removable stitch marker on your needle there. And then when you get to that place, you can pick up an extra stitch there or do an increase there. But it marks the place when you don't want to slip the stitches off, because you can slip it right on your needle. So I think that's great. Okay. So the other thing that I always have in my knitting bag is a crochet hook. And I usually have quite a collection of crochet hooks in my knitting bag, not because I crochet, but because I use them to fix mistakes. I also use them for provisional cast-ons. So if I'm doing a crochet cast on, I like to have a big hook so that I can do my provisional cast on a in a yarn that's larger than what I'm working with. And I like to have it nice and loose. I like to have plenty of space to see that. So if I'm doing a provisional cast on, I'm going to do it with a large crochet hook. I also have smaller crochet hooks for when we fix mistakes, but fixing mistakes is, I think, a crochet hook's highest purpose for a knitter. And I wanted to show you how to do that real quick. So I think that's just kind of fun to know. Most everybody knows how to correct a dropped stitch in stockinette fabric, but you might not know how to do it in garter stitch fabric. So that would be kind of a fun and interesting thing to look at, right? Who would like to see that? Yes, tell me in the chat if that would be helpful for you. Hi, Liz. Nice to see you. Hey, Norma. Everybody good? Okay. I'm going to share my screen here. Yes, Liz would like to see that. Okay. Okay. Well, good, good. Terry. Oh, yes. Okay. All right. Good. Lots of folks would like to see that. Excellent. Because I would love to show you. All right. So here is some garter stitch fabric. And we have dropped our stitch right here. And you see that I have marked it with my handy little locking stitch marker, and I'm going to go ahead and take that off. I'm going to go ahead and take this one more stitch down so that we can pick it up knitwise first. Okay, so you see that we have this lost stitch. Poor sad little stitch. We're going to use our crochet hook. We are going to insert our crochet hook through that lost stitch, and we're going to find this next strand. So this is the stitch that came out, this strand of yarn. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our crochet hook face up, and we are going to bring our hook from front to back through the lost stitch and underneath the next strand up. Okay, now we're going to grab that and we're just going to pull it right through. And you see that makes a knit stitch. And if this were stockinette, we would just do that all the way up. I would make another one and another one. But you see, this isn't stockinette, is it? So we don't want a whole column of stockinette stitches, do we? We want a column of garter stitches. So this stitch right here, this next one, needs to be picked up as a purl stitch. Now, obviously, we could just turn our fabric over and pick it up as a knit stitch on the other side. But what's cool about products like the Stitch Fixer, and I don't have my Stitch Fixer with me, but I have a similar kind of gadget, is a double-ended, so then you have it on both sides. So let's first look at how we're going to pick up this stitch to make it a purl stitch. What we need to do is we need to take the strand above and put our hook in from back to front and bring that strand through. Okay, so that's how you pick it up purl-wise. And now we're going to do a knit one because it's garter stitch, 1 row of knit, 1 row of purl. Okay. And then we'll do a purl stitch again. From the bottom. Bring that up. And then the last one is a knit stitch. Okay, so we're all alternating the way that we pick up those stitches, as a knit, as a purl. And that's going to help us get our garter stitch back in shape. Now, if you have one of these little double-ended crochet hooks, and the Stitch Fixer wouldn't work on this size because it's too bulky, but this is nice and big. You don't have to take it out. You can just move it back and forth, and your stitch can stay on the shaft of this double-ended crochet hook, which is pretty handy. Very kind of cool, right? So a crochet hook is a very, very important thing to have in your Notions bag. And they're so cheap. I mean, you can have a whole set in every knitting bag that you have. Tell me in the chat whether you have one Notions bag that you move from knitting bag to knitting bag, or do you have a separate Notions bag for each knitting bag? Or do you even have multiple knitting bags? Do you only have one knitting bag with project bags inside? Most knitters have so many bags. I, for one, have so many bags. All right. So, a couple crochet hooks, yes. Hi, Judy. How are you guys? Nice to see you. Okay, what else did I want to show you? Oh, highlighter tape. Have you seen this? This is very cool. So this is what you use instead of just going in and highlighting your row, because it's removable. And this is amazing for keeping track of where you are in your pattern, whether it's a written out pattern or whether it's a charted pattern. I'm going to show you both how I use it. So in this instance, so when I'm just on my pattern, I use it to kind of mark where I am. If you have your pattern written out, like it's a 12-row repeat and you're working across, you're going to put that highlighter tape underneath the row that you are on. Okay, as you're working down from top to bottom, I put the highlighter tape right underneath the row that I am on. Okay, and I'll show you how we do that for charts too. I'll change my mirror here. Okay. Sandy has a notions bag in each bag. One's notions bag that I move around. Each, usually 2 or 3 sets. Yes. Sounds like you've been knitting a long time, Holly. That's very cool. Barbara. Whoops. Several knitting bags and several gadget bags. Yes. So it's sort of half and half, right? I have just the one notions bag because it's always going to be that I don't have exactly what I need in that particular bag, like not having my clear ruler tonight. I left it in one of the bags and oh well. So let's see what Jal says. One main notions pouch, but another with tools. Right. Yeah. I mean, and God, who would have thought that we needed so many little knickknacks for knitting, but we do. Okay, so when I am working from a chart, trust me when I tell you, I am not actually doing this chart from this book, because if I were going to be doing this chart from this book, I promise you I would have put it on the Xerox machine and I would have made it much, much larger. Or I would have put it into Knit Companion and made it much, much larger. But if you don't have that, it's very handy to have the highlighter tape marking where you are on your chart. Can you see that? Sort of far away. But when you're working from a chart, unlike working from a written pattern, I always put my highlighter tape above the row that I am on. So for me, the idea is that I don't want to get ahead of myself. I want the highlighter tape to indicate where I am and obscure a little bit what's coming next. I can see on my fabric when I'm working from a chart that it looks like what is in the chart, but I don't want to get confused by what is coming up versus what's actually on my needles right now. So that's why I use that. And the other thing that I think is really helpful to do is to have, you see how this chart is worked. They have the garment and then they have the sleeves charted out right on top. Now that's beautiful for centering the pattern and understanding how it goes, and also for keeping the charts from taking up 20 pages on their own. But it is kind of confusing because you see you have all of these different sizes laid out right on top. So not only do I keep a highlighter tape above the row that I'm on, I keep it just to the right of the size that I'm doing. And I would move that up as I go just so that I can be very clear about where I am in terms of the size that I'm making versus the others, because I think that is super confusing, right? Anybody else have a problem with that? That is a problem. Okay. What is Knit Companion? Okay, Knit Companion is a piece of software that you can, I think they might have a free version. I know they have a paid version, and you can download it. And I believe you can upload any kind of a PDF pattern into it, and it gives you the ability to kind of track where you are. I think it might even prevent you from needing the highlighter tape if you are tech savvy and you like to work, say, from an iPad or even your phone. Then it has the pattern right there on your phone and you can make it as large as you want. So it's super wonderful. Everybody who uses it swears by it. My knitting is not so much in the stitch patterns. I don't do a lot of lace or a lot of color work, but if I did, I would definitely be using that. Anybody use Knit Companion? I would love to hear your thoughts on that. So tell me what you think about Knit Companion. Okay, so obviously we're going to have a pen and a pencil. I always have a small gauge circular needle so that if I need to slip some stitches off and hold them for something, I like them better than I do stitch holders. I do have lots of stitch holders and I do use those, but I tend to use the double pointed needles because they're easier to knit right off of, and I don't know, I find them handy. Okay. And you know, I always have a million needles. Who doesn't have a million needles? So it's just nice to sort of have them there. They're smooth, you know, their tip is going to be right, and it's easy to slip your stitches off and hold them. So let's see. Sandy uses Knit Companion and loves it. Arlette uses Knit Companion and loves it. Susie says, okay, let's see. Yes, they have a free version. Oh. So Susie's referring to a spreadsheet that we have in Club Crazy for You for our level 3. I guess that's the junior level when you're doing your first custom fit sweater and tracking all of your simultaneous shaping. So thank you for that, Susie. Super fun. Anyway, so always have one of these in your bag, because if you have to unknit and your knitting is tight, it's nice to be able to unknit onto a smaller needle. That is often very helpful if you have to take out a bunch and your knitting is tight. It's also really nice if you're going to drop down a whole lot. If you're going to rip, you can go ahead and put this into the stitches in your fabric, kind of like a lifeline, and it's small enough that it won't distort your fabric, and then you can rip down to exactly where you are and your stitches are already on a needle. So I love that. Okay, we always have a pen in our bag because we need to write down. I did a blog post once, lies knitters tell themselves. And one of the biggest ones for me is, oh yeah, I'll remember what I did. Or I'll remember that I changed that and how. Yeah, I won't. You won't. You have to write it down. Every little thing that you do that's different from the pattern that you did on one side, I don't know. You have to do it on the same side. And I know you think you're going to remember, but you probably aren't. So go ahead and make a copy of your pattern and write on it, and have that pen handy. So, all right. So the other thing I keep in there is needle and thread, as in a sharp needle and sewing thread, for if you have some like a pom-pom to tie on, or our pom-poms clip on, you know, they snap on, but you have to sew the base to the top of the hat. So I do that with sewing thread. Same with buttons. I sew the buttons onto the fabric with sewing thread, or I'll make a cufflink style button so that I can button it through the fabric, but I do that with sewing thread. Ginny, the knower of all things at the shop, uses dental floss, and she keeps dental floss in her notions bag all the time. And I think this is so brilliant, because not only does dental floss make a nice strong lifeline, it also has that little cutter there. And so if you don't have your scissors, or you can't find your scissors, or your scissors get confiscated at security, you can still cut your thread with that, as long as it's not, you can cut your yarn as long as it's not too thick, using that little dental floss cutter. So that's super fun. All right, what else did I have? I keep an emery board in here because sometimes your nails get snaggy and you don't want to snag your fabric. Same reason I keep lotion in my knitting bag. I have a lavishe bar, which is a lotion bar, so it's never going to spill. I love that, and I love the soak lotions. Again, with the dental floss. Let's see what Norma said about Knit Companion. Yes. Good. Well, maybe we should just do kind of a thing on Knit Companion. So are there any kinds of special notions that are your favorites that I did not mention tonight? You know, everybody has kind of their own way of doing things, but if there's anything in there, oh, obviously a tape measure. Yes, let's see. Yes, everybody uses Knit Companion. I think we're going to have to kind of do a special on Knit Companion. That would be really fun, wouldn't it? Okay, so if you do not have notions like this, or you want to send your significant other on a fun adventure, tell them to go and buy you some notions that you don't have, or that you need, or we can always use some more of them. Last thing I'm going to show you are the claw clips, which I absolutely adore. These are by Cocoknits. You see that? Oh. These little clippy guys. So I use those to hold my fabric together if I'm trying it on or when I'm going to be seaming it. So they are just absolutely great. And if you have a recalcitrant hair, you can just kind of clip it away there too. I'm feeling very silly tonight. So, oh, yes, cable needles. Lots of choices of cable needles. That's what I wanted to talk about. I use double pointed needles. So I always have a bunch of double pointed needles in my bag because I use them as cable needles. I use them if I'm going to drop down a whole section of my fabric and re-knit it up. Cable needles are the way to go on that. So absolutely, thank you for pointing that out, Holly. Yes, cable needles and double pointed needles. And the size cable needle that you use is determined by the gauge of your fabric. So Holly's absolutely right that if you're working in a chunky fabric, it's best to have a larger cable needle. I'm not a fan of the ones that are shaped like little hooks. I like the ones that I can actually knit off of better. So, and that's why I use the double pointed needle for them. So I always have probably 6 or 7 double pointed needles, 2 of each size in my bag. So lots and lots of stuff in there. Let's see what else. What does Kathy say? Wooden cable needles for holding stitches. Yes, absolutely. And another thing that a lot of people have are stitch stoppers. And if you have got your stitches on a double pointed needle or a cable needle, you can just pop a stitch stopper on either side and your stitches will be there secure and you don't have to worry about them falling off. So normally I like to knit with very, very slick needles, whether that's highly polished wood or metal. But for my double pointed needles, I like them to have just a little more grip. So I use a bamboo or a unhighly polished birch double pointed needle because I like the little bit of grab they have in there. So super fun. All right. Well, that is what I have for you tonight. And I hope that you had as much fun digging through my Notions bag. And I hope you go home and look in your Notions bag and make sure you have all the stuff in there that you need and maybe outfit yourself with another one. If you have a couple projects that you like to have, sock knitters probably have lots of different notions than me. I'm kind of a sweater knitter. So I'd be interested in hearing that. You can tell me in the comments after the fact if you're a sock knitter and what you use for sock knitting that might be different from what I've talked about tonight. But in any event, I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday and a lovely evening. And until next time, keep knitting and create something beautiful. I'll see you next week.